Welcome back to yet another live podcast on your favorite football updates channel. Apologies for coming a bit late. I needed to cool down a bit. I was literally panting and sweating. That's why my face will appear a bit pale for purposes of this broadcast and just washed up and things like that because it's been an incredibly hot day down here in Kampala, Uganda. But yeah, we are glad for the beautiful weather and we will continue to serve you regardless of what the weather conditions are. For us here, while you guys over there in Europe and among other areas battle your winter, for us on here, we are going through what could pass for your summer, literally in the first month of the year. But anyways, it's the 24th of January, 2026, and I do come to you live from Kampala, Uganda. My comrade here is saying Leron Kulina. Anyways, good to have you, Steve. Always a pleasure to see a familiar face and more so a friendly face. This morning, we're doing our preview for some of the weekend action to come, and we had Mweskwa Joshua, another sort of familiar name, not familiar face but familiar name, as we went through that, and as we wait for other usual suspects on the channel that do join us on every single day and every single night. People like Pedri, people like Boss Royal, people like Daniel Tuton, and so many others across from the different parts of the world. Thank you so much, Team India, for the continued love and support that you show us on this channel in whatever it is that we do to continue to serve you. We'll continue to do our best. At the moment, I'm following up on updates on the game between Villarreal, that's the Yellow Submarines, over Spain against Real Madrid. And as I speak, the game is still goalless. Nonetheless, my updates could be a couple of seconds behind due to internet speed issues, but yeah, we'll do our best to keep up. But before we continue any further, allow me to have our audios tested just to make sure everything checks out perfectly well. But otherwise, I hope you're having a wonderful weekend. It's been a blockbuster weekend, some broken hearts if you're a Liverpool fan at the death of it, because Bournemouth carried no prisoners of war in that late winner against Liverpool. So we'll be looking at that. But what made the news more today, unfortunately, is not the results that we did witness, including a surprise result for me when West Ham thrashed Sunderland by 3-1 in the early kickoff before Fulham got the better of Brighton and Hove Albion in a 2-1 victory. All that happened. I remember also earlier on in the day, I tried to catch up on the game for Como, and at the time it was 2-0 at the time. When I left it, I was unable to see it through because then I had to switch attention to the game between Manchester City and Wolverhampton Wanderers. But that game, Como managed to win it by 6-0 against Torino. Francesco Sola Fabregas, I tried to keep up with him because he's really, really doing tremendously well for a team in which he owns some shares alongside former Arsenal captain Thierry Henry, among other faces. So, like I said, the person that made the news today was referee Farai Hallam, Farai Hallam, or Hallam, because of his decision to refuse to give Manchester City or to award Manchester City a penalty, which I thought was the right decision to make. So, we'll be digesting all that and more in today's broadcast. So for those of you that are just joining us, kindly like the broadcast, but also consider subscribing to the channel if you're new here. So where do we start it from? I mean, there's only one place to start, if we're being honest. That game between Manchester City and Wolverhampton Wanderers, a game that Manchester City managed to win by 2-0 thanks to strikes by Omar Mamosh and Antoine Semenyo there at the death of halftime. In the second half, he had an almost some moment when he hit the corner of the crossbar there before that ball, hit the crossbar and went out. I mean, it was going to be a spectacular goal because he sort of had to turn a defender before he takes the shot on what would pass for his weaker foot, but he's so good with both feet that sometimes you may struggle to wonder, you may struggle to know which one is his better foot. He's more of an Usman Dembele kind of player, the way you remember Santi Cazorla at Arsenal. Those kinds of players, they do not come very often, but when they do, they often come in a special package. And so the 25-year-old, I think he turned 26. The 26-year-old Ghanaian international, born in the UK, had an almost star moment, but he had already gotten his name to the score sheet with that goal in the second minute of stoppage time of the first stanza. That means you can't say 47th minute, because then that would mean it was in the second half. So, but Omar Mamush opened the scoring in the 6th minute. Wolves in the second half, I thought, were brilliant. They did their work really well. They defended well. Jose Sa was forced into a couple of saves, and he was up to the challenge. But of course, you always felt that Manchester City had the edge. They were at home. Ryan Cherki looked sharp. Yes, he did not score. Missed a couple of chances in there, but he looked sharp. Tijan Reinders, Rodri, Semenyo, they looked sharp. Matthias Nunes at right back. Mark Gehi, for me, had a standout performance. In Manchester City colours, we all know he just joined recently from Crystal Palace for £20 million and things like that. So he had a really, really decent performance. But for whatever Wolverhampton Wanderers did right, or for the few moments in which they did it right, they could unfortunately not find the breakthrough, because they only had one shot on target out of their 11 attempts on goal, which was the equivalent of the shots that Manchester City also had on goal. Really, they had 4 on target. Now, away from all the fancy, beautiful, tactical moments, the moment that then turns out, defined the match, not that it should, is the moment where a Wolves defender, I think it was Mosquera, handles the ball in the area, and it's not given as a penalty. The referee decides it's not a penalty. That's Farai, who was having his debut game in the Premier League. Now, of course, VAR looked at the incident and they decided to send him to the monitor. When he got to the monitor, he looked at the incident and maintained his on-field decision that it was not a penalty. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritties of the action itself, I want to commend Farai for having the cogence, and excuse the language if you find that offensive, but for having the cogence to say, yes, you think I should have a second look at this, because it is, in your opinion or in your wisdom, you think it is a possible penalty. But I'll stick with my on-field decision to say it's not a penalty. And I'll leave the rationale to myself, or perhaps he explained it to them. Now, oftentimes, and I started talking about this during the AFCON 2023 that was played in 2024 in Ivory Coast, because officials were being sent to the monitor to review incidents, and they maintained their own field decisions, which was something almost never heard of, or a rare commodity in some of the top flight leagues, and particularly in the Premier League, where we get to scrutinize refereeing decisions week in, week out, because oftentimes they come in a controversial manner. It's almost felt over the years, ever since the introduction of VAR, that it's almost an unwritten rule for match officials to live by, that the moment you're sent to the monitor, you ought to change your decision, that you ought to change your on-field decision. Allow me to take you a little bit back, just over last weekend. You remember the tackle for Diego Dalot against Jeremy Doku? Bit of a high boot. Now, in real time, of course, the referee did not give a red card for that, and he gave a yellow card. And I thought, in my opinion, it was the right decision. Now, when you review the incident in a replay, it looks more ugly than it actually was in real action. When you see it in the real moment of it, in that quick play, it doesn't appear to be dangerous. But when they slow it down, then it looks worse than it actually is. That's what I felt. So the referee is not called to the monitor, so he did not get to review the incident. But I have a strong feeling that had had been summoned to the monitor to review the incident, he most likely would have changed his decision from a yellow card to a red card for Diego Dalot in that Manchester derby. Now, fast forward, we come to this weekend, and I struggle to recall the exact Manchester City player who was trying to play the ball before the handball for Mosquera. Now, is it a penalty or is it not a penalty? I'll say it is subjective because somebody else, Mogambi Nason says hi. Hi, Mugambi. Good to have you on the broadcast. Now, like I said, in my opinion, it's subjective. It's subjective. Why? Because one will argue that the ball hit his arm, which is true. Secondly, they'll argue that the ball, his hands were not in a natural position. That is also a fact. So on that basis, somebody will sort of argue, perhaps to the letter of the law, that it should have been a penalty, basing on those facts. Now, on the other side, where I do find myself as the individual, beyond the grand description of the moment, is that it's not a penalty. Why? While the ball hits his arm, while his arm is in an unnatural position, there's no actual intent for the player to handle the ball. A lot of times, when we talk about arms being in a natural position, some people paint for you the kind of picture that as if they want players to play the game with the arms on their bodies as though they are soldiers marching at a parade. Unfortunately, it's not. Football is never played that way, because the thing about arms, like some body parts, they move with reflexes, and the moment you're in motion, usually the arms contribute to your balance. When you're running, that's why I do not think. That's why we have the Paralympics, where if you do not have your arms, you cannot go in a sprint with Usain Bolt, because they believe that that person is handicapped. Now, if it is the legs that run and the arms have no standing, then why can't the two be allowed to compete in the same competition? Think about that for a moment. But let's park it on the side. So back in the actual sport itself, you have this moment where the player is running back and his arms are literally all over the place. In other words, in support of the motion itself, because people want to isolate the incident and sort of freeze it. And yet life does not operate that way. If he had moved his arm into the direction of the ball, then it would be easy to argue there was intent to handle the ball. The quick example I can drive you to is go back to that game that PSV beat up against Liverpool, I think by 4-1. The first goal is a penalty. And who is the culprit? Virgil van Dijk. Because as the corner is floated in, he jumps up, raises both arms up as though he's a basketball player or a volleyball player trying to put in a block, and he handles the ball. Now, that is intentional. There we can argue that arms were in a natural position. Now, again, another point of observation. Go and look at those players when they're defending a free kick, usually when they are defending a corner. Do they jump with their arms straight close to the body? No, because they use their arms, or the arms go up in support of the entire body structure. The only time you'll find a player jumping flat, high up in trying to defend a ball is during a free kick. During a free kick, they'll keep their arms close to their bodies and try to jump because they're lined up in a pile of players and they have formed a wall. But in this particular case, you have an isolated incident where a player is running back and then the ball is played and it hits his arm. I stand with the referee's decision. It's not a penalty. Why? There's no intention to handle the ball. You know? Now, if there's no intention to handle the ball, it takes me back to a principle that is essentially or was essentially not a rule, the ball to hand. You remember, I think it was the game, was it Arsenal Man United? Actually, it was Arsenal versus Newcastle at St. James's Park. Arsenal win that game by 2-1. The two late headers from Mikel Merino and Gabriel Magalhaes to cancel out, I think, was it Nick Voltmada's goal? There, Gabriel Magalhaes is judged by most to have handled the ball in the area. It was true, the ball hit his arm. Anthony Elanga was attempting to put in a cross. So, in putting in a cross, the ball deflects off Gabriel Magalhaes' body and it hits his arm. Now, his arm was in an unnatural position. It was a bit high up in the air. But why? He was in a sweeping motion. He's diving down. You get the point. So, the referee judges under the old principle of a ball to hand. It's not a rule, but the ball hits his body first and then hits the arm. That means he ignores the position of the arm in that incident and looks at an earlier position of the ball. In this particular case, we do not have that. The ball does not hit any part of the body of Mosquera before it hits his arm. But what's the referee's judgment? He goes to human nature. How do our bodies operate? Now, oftentimes when players enter the box and maybe they're trying to defend a cross, usually they will wrap their arms in behind them or tuck them very close to their body. Again, this is not a moment where a player is attempting to make a cross, you know? So if it had been given, it would have been justified. That's why in the start I said, the moment itself, whether it's a penalty or not a penalty, is subjective. And I told you why. If it had been given, there are reasons to justify it. The ball hits the arm, that's a fact. The arm is deemed to be in an unnatural position. But in this particular case, the referee decides to say, I'll use my common sense, knowing the game and how body movement is. And he judges it's not a penalty. He's summoned to the VAR, to the video assistant referee to look at the incident, and he says, I'll keep my decision. Why? Because I feel it's not a penalty. Now, of course, Pep Guardiola does not agree with the decision itself, because he said the referee made his Premier League debut. Now everybody will know him. It's the first time. I think he will go to the TV and disallow for a normal position of the arm. Get those words clearly. It's the first time I think he will go to the TV and disallow for a normal position of the arm. Then he goes on to say that I'm pretty sure Howard Webb tomorrow is going to appear in the media to explain why it's not a penalty. What have they done against Manchester United? The first time they've done it because the situation was a little bit doubt, right? Now, he's speaking about the tackle that I told you about Diego Dalot against Jeremy Doku. He goes on to say that's why Jeremy Doku did not play against Bodo Glimt for the action from Dalot. He says, but it's okay. I'm waiting tomorrow. Do not wait until Wednesday. We have Champions League. We are busy. Howard Webb, come tomorrow, explain why it's not a penalty. Now, the reason as why he says he expects Howard Webb to come out and justify, we all know Howard Webb is the head of the PGMOL. That's the body for the Premier League referees. Two, because he knows for a fact that in situations like that, if you go by precedent and practice, that on a given day is an absolute penalty, that they are going to give it based on the kinds of precedent that they've set themselves. You get the point. But go back to that phrase where he says he will, it's the first time, I think, he will go to the TV and disallow for a normal position of the arm. Why does he think it's the normal position of the arm? First of all, the player that I was trying to look for in my head was, I think, Omar Mamush. He was the one trying to flick the ball. It's more, he was more like trying to flick it over the head of a Mosquera before the ball hits his arm. Then the other unlikely school of thought that one would think of is that the Omar Mamush intentionally plays that ball to the arm of the defender. When you see the moment in a frozen picture, you're going to think, oh, Mosquera came with his arms wide open as though he was going to hug somebody, and then he handles that ball. That's going to be your conclusion, you know? But if you look at it in real time or in playtime, you may arrive to a different conclusion, you know? So that's why I said it's subjective. In my opinion, I agree with the referee's decision. 2, he tells us that not every time you're sent to the monitor, you're supposed to change your decision. Now, I can only hope that his mind does not get wasted by PGML, by biasing him to say, in our practice, that's a penalty. Like I said, a lot of people are going to think Manchester City have been robbed. And as a matter of fact, one would also argue that the ball does appear to slightly brush off the thigh or the upper knee of Mosquera before it goes to the arm. When you see it in real time, you'll think that's not a penalty. Or if it were given, it would be a harsh penalty. The ball brushes off Mosquera. It brushes off his lower thigh or upper knee, depending on how you describe that part, before it hits the arm. So the easy interpretation on one side could be that it's not a penalty because it's a ball to hand, as opposed to being a straight handball. You get the point. But even if that were not to be the case, the way his arm is stretched out, it's to try and get, you know how you try to sort of shove the opponent? Unfortunately, could not reach Omar Mamush. But again, that's my own interpretation of the moment. Somebody else could interpret it differently. But I certainly agree with the referee's decision, Farai, that it's not a penalty, in my opinion. So, if Pep Guardiola thinks it should have been a penalty, then he's looking at precedent. What's been the trend of penalties issued in the Premier League before? But if it were against him, if the roles had been reversed, he will also agree with the referee's decision that it's not a penalty, or that if you're going to give it, it's going to be a harsh decision. You know? So those are the factors at play. The question is, what is your view? Was it a penalty or was it not a penalty for you? Anyways, we'll leave it at that. But that result for Manchester City, the 2-0 win against Wolverhampton Wanderers, means that Manchester City have moved within 4 points behind the leaders Arsenal following that victory. Arsenal, we all know, are in action tomorrow at 7:30 p.m. against Manchester United. That's the game to come. But earlier on, there were some other results. Like I said, West Ham stand Sunderland when they beat them by 3-1. I say stand because it was 3-0 at halftime. And Brobbey needed that 66-minute goal in the second half to give Sunderland what turned out to be a mere consolation. But a brilliant header from Somerville, a penalty from Gerard Bowen, and a wonderful strike, brilliant strike from outside the area from Fernandes had been enough in the 14th minute, in the 28th minute, and the 43rd minute, respectively, to give West Ham the lead against Sunderland. And you could see that as soon as that third goal goes in, Nuno Espirito Santo goes into wild celebrations, as if to suggest, it's game over. We've sealed this. Mind you, with that victory, that means West Ham are the only team in the Premier League with 2 consecutive wins. Yes, you had that right. But where are West Ham? They are 18th on the Premier League log, but they are the only team to have won their last 2 games in the Premier League. Of course, plenty of action is to come our way. In other words, match day 23 is yet to be wrapped up, so perhaps we will get another one. But remember, in the previous game, United won, Arsenal drew, Aston Villa lost, Liverpool drew, Chelsea had lost in their previous game. Chelsea won in their previous game, but they play tomorrow because they beat Brentford by 2-0. So, in other words, when you look at the form table, in the last 5 fixtures, no team has 2 consecutive wins. So it was a bit of a surprise result for me, but I thought West Ham really had an incredible first half. They had an incredible first half. More like they literally blew, that Sunderland team away. It's a Sunderland team that did not have Granit Xhaka in the team, so he was absent. So they kind of struggled in midfield, despite the promises of Noah Sadiki, who has started to be linked with a potential move to Man United, among a host of other Premier League clubs. Fernandes, brilliant goal. Somerville, brilliant goal. The other player I wanted to, I think it was Konstantinos Mavropanos, had a good game, as did Wan-Bissaka, Jean-Claire Todibo, Sunderland. Let me recall. No, West Ham, again through Fernandes, had almost scored another spectacular goal, but it hit the crossbar. It was a shot from the outside of the area. So brilliant result there for West Ham, really. Then in another fixture, Tottenham Hotspur shared the Spurs with Burnley in a 2-2 draw. Now, for the game between Sunderland and West Ham, our prediction had been a 2-2 draw between the two sides. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. Tottenham, I thought they would beat up against Burnley by 2-1. That wasn't the case because Axel Tuanzebe scored in the 45th minute to cancel out Mickey van de Ven's 38th minute goal, while Lyle Foster scored in the 76th minute to put Burnley in the lead, while Christian Romero scored a late equalizer in the 90th minute to rescue a point for Tottenham Hotspur. Now, again, I do not know. Now, I understand Borussia Dortmund were down to 10 men, but by the time they get down to 10 men, Tottenham were already leading by 0-0. That goal by, I think, Christian Romero, again, before Dominic Solanke scores. And then they had a player sent off and they played the rest of the match with the madness. But nonetheless, beating up against Borussia Dortmund, that's a commendable result for Tottenham Hotspur in the UEFA Champions League at home. Away from home, they've done fairly well in the Premier League this season, and I thought they would go to Turf Moor and pick 3 points. Unfortunately for them, it looked uncomfortable, and they ended up with a draw. So sometimes you do struggle to make sense of what um, to make sense of what Tottenham are actually about. You know, on one hand, you have a very serious team in Tottenham Hotspurs. On another hand, you're questioning everything that they stand for. You know, you're wondering whether they are even worth your time. I've always known Tottenham Hotspurs, for majority of their life, competitive years or not, to sort of struggle in what I tend to call the final bend of the season. In those games, late March or April, driving into May, that's when they usually crumble. This season, they're blown hot and cold. On one hand, they're busy because they won that fixture in the first leg by 3-0. On one hand, they're beating Manchester City by 2-0. On another day, they are losing to West Ham United by 2-1 at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. And you wonder the kind of team that they are. But again, it is what it is, So, anyways, in the other results, like I said, Fulham beat up against Brighton by 2-1. Samuel Chukwueze and squad to restore parity for Fulham because Yassine Ayari had scored a 28th minute goal to give Brighton the lead, while Harry Wilson scored in the second minute of stoppage time to win it for Fulham. We're talking about a player in Harry Wilson whose contract talks with the Cottagers have been put on hold pending a resolution between the club and the manager, Marco Silva, on his future, because even he himself, his current deal runs until the end of the season. And I remember when I read that news, I was a little bit in disbelief because Harry Wilson is hands down Fulham's best player this season. Now, maybe Fulham fans could argue otherwise, but for me, hats off Harry Wilson. He scored crucial goals in this campaign. You remember their victory away to Tottenham Hotspurs? He scored in that game. On the Premier League tally, he has 8 goals because the top scorer is still Brad Erling Haaland, 20 Premier League goals. Igor Thiago from Brentford, 16 goals. Anton Semenyo, Bournemouth, Man City with 11 goals. Dominic Calvert-Lewin of Leeds United with 9 goals. And then you have a whole host of players that have 8 goals. There, the likes of Jean-Philippe Mateta, Hugo Ekitike, Danny Welbeck, Bruno Guimaraes, Harry Wilson himself, Junior Kropi over, Junior has 7 goals of Bournemouth. So, but the point is, he is such a brilliant player, and I do not get how or why Fulham think they need to wait to resolve Marco Silva's future to decide whether they want to keep him or not. For me, it's a no-brainer. But they are the bosses. And then, in the late kickoff of Saturday, Bournemouth stunned Liverpool for their 3rd ever victory against Liverpool. Coming into today's fixture, I think the two sides had met 17 times. Liverpool had won the fixture 14 times, Bournemouth twice, and there had been 1 draw. That's why I did not expect a draw in this game. And when it was 2-2, I was still thinking, Liverpool are going to nick it because maybe I was in support of my own prediction, although we're already far from the perfect score because my prediction had been a 2-1 victory for Liverpool. And yet here they were going 2 goals down in that game. Evanilson and Gimenez scored in the 26th minute and the 33rd minute to give Bournemouth the lead. Virgil van Dijk having a bad day in office. However, he scored in the 45th minute to pull one back for Liverpool to give them hope. And Dominic Szoboszlai, for the 3rd time this season, scored from a direct free kick. The first came against Arsenal. The second came against Olympique Marseille in midweek. And then today, he scored from a straight free kick. against Bournemouth in the 80th minute to make it 2-2. And there I was thinking, well, Bournemouth are being Bournemouth, Liverpool are going to nick this one. And it's Bournemouth through Adil, who scored in the 50th minute of stoppage time to win the game by 3-2. I think this is the second time in the last 3 or 4 games that they've won the game by 3-2. The other game was against Tottenham Hotspurs. They won that fixture by 3-2. But also in between there, they also lost to Arsenal by a similar scoreline. You know, Gubas says, I'm back, Mr. I'm back, me RIP Sukuna. Always a pleasure to see you, RIP Sukuna. Do us the absolute honors and like the broadcast, but it's always a pleasure to see you around. Anyways, the game between Real Madrid and Valencia, and Villarreal is still goalless. There's a goal in that game. Jesus Christ. Is there? Yes. Real Madrid have scored in the 47th minute of the game through Kylian Mbappe to make it 1-0 for to give Real Madrid the lead. So very early in the second half, Real Madrid have themselves on the score sheet there for their lead. Beautiful things there. My prediction was a 3-2 victory for Real Madrid against these yellow submarines that have had a brilliant start, a brilliant season in the Spanish La Liga, even though the same cannot be said for their exploits in the UEFA Champions League, because the UEFA Champions League, trust me, they've been far from good. They've been far from good. So, Liverpool, I thought, when you got to goes down, because this was the opening game of the season, and Liverpool won it by 4-2. It was a very uncomfortable win. And the result, I remember saying, the 4-2 result was quite very, very flattering to Liverpool, because they needed 2 late goals from Federico Chiesa in I think around the 88th or 86th minute, and then in stoppage time from Mo Salah to win that game by 4-2. They had taken a 2-0 lead through Hugo Ekitike and Cody Gakpo, but Anton Semenyo in the second half had scored a brace to restore parity. So, Bournemouth under Andoni Iraola completed the perfect revenge against the Reds today. So, a very beautiful result for Bournemouth. It moves them to 13th place on the Premier League log with 30 points. They struggled for wins. Same applies for Brighton. I think Brighton have only won one game in the last 10 now. They're about. So Bournemouth themselves had literally fallen off the wagon. I think they had gone about 11 games without a win, or even 13, until the day they beat up against Tottenham by 3-2. So those are the teams we are talking about. But I thought they had a brilliant game. Dominic Szoboszlai had a good game. Fran Wirtz, average game. But they'll be hoping for better days. Liverpool. But that result sort of put a dent on their top 4 hopes. Yes, they remain 4th on the Premier League log, behind Aston Villa, and behind them is Manchester United, who play Arsenal, only a point behind them. So Liverpool will be praying hard that Arsenal get the better of Manchester United and that Man United don't get to leapfrog them. If somebody asked you between Man United and Liverpool, who has had the worst season, you'd easily say Manchester United off of your head. But when you look at the Premier League log, the picture is quite different. Quite different. So yeah, that's a picture from that side. So action does continue tomorrow with Super Sunday. 3 games will kick off at 5 p.m. East African time. That's Chelsea up away to Crystal Palace. I went for a Chelsea 1-0 victory. Brentford against Nottingham Forest, I went for a 2-1 victory. I think 3-1 against Nottingham Forest. Aston Villa against Newcastle, I went for a draw in that one. And then Arsenal against Manchester United, I went for a 2-1 victory for the Arsenal. Hope they don't disappoint me. And then, of course, match day 23 will wrap up on Monday when Everton host Leeds United at the Hill Dixon Stadium there. Oh, come on. Typical Real Madrid, counter-attacking football. You say Arsenal or Manchester United? I say Arsenal. That's Asha Shakul returning to the channel. Like I said, my prediction was or is a 2-1 victory for the Arsenal against Manchester United on Super Sunday. So, anyways, let's look at some of the other results from elsewhere today. In the Spanish La Liga, Osasuna beat up against Rayo Vallecano by 3-1. Valencia beat up against Espanyol by 3-2. Sevilla beat up Athletic Bilbao by 2-1. Well, like I said, Real Madrid are leading the proceedings by a 0-0 that called by Kylian Mbappe there. What a standout season he's having, Kylian Mbappe. So if Real Madrid win today, they'll leapfrog Barcelona, who play Real Oviedo tomorrow. Hi, Pedri. How are you, my brother? I hope you're having a wonderful evening slash night on you there. So it's with Real Madrid in a 1-0 lead, they have leapfrogged Barcelona, provided it finishes that way. And Barcelona dropped to second. Atletico de Madrid moved to third on a better goal difference, I think. Yes, on a better goal difference. If Villarreal are to be beaten tonight, then Villarreal go to fourth, Espanyol fifth, Real Betis sixth, Celta Vigo seventh, Osasuna, Elche, Real Sociedad, that's to complete the top 10. At one point, Real Sociedad were really, really struggling and they were in the bottom half of the table, far deep down there. But yeah, Levante, Real Oviedo, and Deportivo Alves are the teams in the relegation zone and things like that. Excuse me. Sevilla are 11th, Genoa 13th, with Athletic Bilbao 12th, all have 24 points, as well as from 9th to 13th, all have 24 points. That's Elche, Sociedad, Sevilla, Athletic Bilbao, and Girona. Pedri says Real Madrid deserve nothing so far. So rubbish, lucky goal only because of a Pape Gueye mistake. Absolute joke of a team. Bellingham deserved a red card on 50th minute. It's truly Madrid. What a joke. By the way, the La Liga team is Espanyol, not Espana. That's what I said, Espanyol. I don't think I've ever called it Espana. Anyway, and the reason as to why I remember Espanyol is because of Mauricio Pochettino. That's where he was before going to Southampton. I think that was around 2014. Was it 2014, 2013? Thereabouts. Then I know they play in the Catalonia derby. No. Sorry about that. They play in the Catalonia derby, so the Catalans are there. Anyways, that's when they play against Barcelona, of course. I mean, so Pedri knows a thing or two about that. Pedri, what's your prediction against Real Oviedo tomorrow? I said mine is a 4-1 victory for Barcelona against Real Oviedo. With or without Pedri, I think Barcelona will still win by that margin because I believe Frankie de Jong can play in that role alongside Marc Casado. So I'm not worried about Barcelona. Anyways, Away from the Spanish La Liga, what did I say? Burnley, Tottenham. Oh, I don't remember, but I seem to remember you predicted. I think a draw. Yes, I think you got the perfect score. Go back and see what I said. Unfortunately, comments are from live videos are hidden when the video is finally propagated to stay online when the live ends, so you cannot revisit those comments. But yeah, I do remember you. Yes, you said a 2-all draw. It's a perfect score for you. Congratulations about that one. Anyways, in the German Bundesliga, you had Bayer Leverkusen beat up against Werder Bremen by 0-0. Mr. Tribe, I think you should write down on paper any predictions we make. Let's play that game. Okay, we'll start it next weekend. Let's start it next weekend. We'll be writing our predictions, and we'll have a go at it. Correct, seeing how we fare in our own predictions. So, Bayern Munich, for the second time this season, lost a game of football. Yes, their first and only loss came against Arsenal 3-1 in the UEFA Champions League. Today they lost to Augsburg by 2-1. I mean, it almost feels miraculous that they lost a game of football. That's what it feels like, because they literally almost never lose. Eintracht Frankfurt got beat by Hoffenheim by 3-1, while Heidenheim were thumped by 3-0 against RB Leipzig. Mainz beat Wolfsburg by 3-1, while Union Berlin lost to Borussia Dortmund by 3-0. So nonetheless, win or lose, it does not change the standings in the German Bundesliga, because Bayern Munich are still 8 points ahead. Those points were 11. They've been reduced to, to 8. You say make up a point system. I say 3 points for a perfect score, 2 points for a win, 1 point for a draw. If it's a perfect score draw, it's 3 points. That's for a perfect score or a perfect prediction. If it's just a win for a team that you predicted to win, regardless of the scoreline, then you get 2 points. And if it's a draw, but if you predict a draw, you get 2 points. So in other words, there's no 1 point. So it's either or. If you get it wrong and you predicted the win and it's a draw, you do not get a point. It's that simple. Will you update points? We can come up with something. It's simple. We can come up with something online. Do a simple spreadsheet. We'll see. We'll see how to go about that. For those that are willing to participate in the weekly predictions, you can, just follow the conversation. Every time we get to the weekend to do our previews, we get to it. We can also maybe do for the UEFA Champions League. No pressure. Anyways, so yeah, Bayern Munich lead the pile after 19 games played. They have 50 points, 2 games lost. Only 1 game lost. They were unbeaten in the German Bundesliga this season. So looks like this season, Vincent Kompany will not be breaking Xabi Alonso's record of 2023-2024 when they won the German Bundesliga title unbeaten. Yep, that's it. That was, I think, the goal or the objective or the chess. But unfortunately for them, they lost to Augsburg by 2-1. So, but nonetheless, they've scored 72 goals. Conceded only 16, so they have a goal difference of 56. You say, I think it will be 5-1 for Barcelona over Oviedo. What do you think of Barcelona score tomorrow? I'm saying Barcelona. I said 4-1. Barcelona to win 4-1. That's my prediction. So Borussia Dortmund comes second with 42 points. Hoffenheim with 36 points in third place. RB Leipzig 35 points in then VfB Stuttgart 33 points in fifth place. Bayer Leverkusen in sixth place with 32 points. Seventh is Eintracht Frankfurt 27 points. Freiburg eighth 24 points. Union Berlin 24 points in ninth place. FC Cologne 20 points in 10th place. Borussia Mönchengladbach 20 points. In 11th place, Wolfsburg, 19 points. In 12th place, 13th place is Augsburg with 19 points. Hamburg SV, 18 points. In 14th place, Werder Bremen, 18 points in 15th place. And in the relegation zone is Mainz, St. Pauli, and Heidenheim. Remember, the bottom two get relegated. The third from the bottom has a playoff game with the team from the lower, league or competition. So yeah, that's the update from the German Bundesliga for those of you that care to know what's happening over there. Anyways, let's quickly run to the Italian Serie A. Like I told you, Como beat up against Torino by 6-0. Fiorentina got beat by Cagliari by 2-1, while Lecce and Lazio, that game is in the 79th minute, and it's still goalless. In the French, okay, let's quickly have a look at the standings there. In the Italian Serie A, Inter Milan lead the pile after 22 games played. They have 52 points. AC Milan play tomorrow, 46 points. Third place is Napoli, 21 games, 43 points. AC Roma, fourth place, 42 points. Como have moved to fifth place with 40 points ahead of Juventus, who play Napoli tomorrow. AC Roma will be up against AC Milan. Then Atlanta occupies 7th place with 32 points. Bologna, 30 points in 8th place. Lazio, 29 points. Udinese in 10th, 26 points. Cagliari, Sassuolo, Cremonese, Parma, Torino, Genoa, Lecce. And then in the bottom three is Fiorentina, Hellas Verona, and Pisa. Those are the teams that form the bottom three. In the French League One, you had Lorient beat up against Points by 2-0. Le Havre and Monaco shared the spoils in a goalless draw, while Marseille are leading up against RC Lens by 2-0 in the 57th minute. Paris Saint-Germain lead the pile with 45 points. RC Lens are second with 43 points. Marseille third with 38 points. Lyon fourth with 33 points. Lille with 32 points in 5th place. Stade Rennes in 6th place with 31 points. Strasbourg 7th with 27 points. Next is Toulouse, Lorient, AC Monaco, Brest, Angers, Le Havre, Paris FC, Nice, Nantes, Auxerre, and Métis form the bottom three. They are in the French League One. For those of you that care to know what's happening in those different leagues. Anyways, guys, Real Madrid still have that narrow lead, against Villarreal. So Villarreal trying to find the equalizer. Still far from it. But anyways, allow me to wrap this one here. Thank you so much, Stephen Bokuru, for being part of the conversation today. For the best you could do. Mogambi Nason, thank you so much for being part of today. Godba, aka RIP Sukuna, and Pedri, it's always a pleasure to have you guys around. Thank you so much for the engagement. Thank you so much for the input in our discussions and engagements. I wish you a wonderful rest of the time. Have a blessed Sunday. Remember, tomorrow there's no morning broadcast, so we will simply do a night broadcast, provided God grants us the good health. Stay blessed, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye for now.